Till then, see you later.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, New Zealand soldiers will provide some very specific weapons training to Ukrainian fighters. It will all happen on UK soil. The Chief of Defence Force explains all live. You on the road right now? Eyes front and hands off that cell phone because a camera could be snapping your mugshot right now is part of a new trial. The revolving door of COVID sees more businesses desperate for fill-in staff as they get whacked again. Scott Morrison's elbowed out of Australia as PM. Labor's Anthony Albanese is in, but is that the real election surprise? And the student army joins the fight against Bromley's invisible enemy, the stench of poo. Catch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Ahi Marie, I'm Evie Ashton. New Zealand will train more than 200 Ukrainian soldiers to use light artillery guns in the coming months. Cabinet has agreed to deploy a further 30 soldiers to the UK to train Ukrainians there. Chief of Defence Force Air Marshal Kevin Short says they'll work with the gun crews until the end of July.
We're expecting 230 Ukrainian forces to be trained. We've been told that they have already got experience on artillery, so we think it'll take at least a week for a gun crew to be trained.
The Prime Minister says at no point will the New Zealanders enter Ukraine. Australia's new Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has promised his country will engage with the world differently on the issue of climate change. In his first media briefing, Mr Albanese, who talked about Australia's relationship, also talked about Australia's relationship with China.
The relationship with China will remain a difficult one. I said that before the election. That has not changed. It is China that has changed, not Australia, and Australia should always stand up for our values, and we will in a government that I lead.
Anthony Albanese's swearing-in ceremony was brought forward to enable him to fly to Tokyo to attend a summit with the leaders of the US, India and Japan. The Prime Minister admits COVID has thrown a few logistical curveballs into her trade mission to the US. Jacinda Ardern flies out to the States tonight and will visit New York, Boston, San Francisco and Seattle. Washington DC is also on the list, but a meeting with President Joe Biden is yet to be locked in. Ms Ardern says officials are working on it despite her recent positive COVID test.
I'd rather not get into the backwards and forwards of the logistics of the meeting. I think the most important thing I can articulate is that there's been a real desire on both sides to make a meeting work. But again, as I say, COVID's just thrown us a few curveballs that we're working through.
The Prime Minister says there wouldn't be a discussion on COVID protocols if there wasn't an intention to meet. An oil and gas support vessel has been sent to the aid of a bulk carrier that has mechanical problems and is drifting off the North Island's west coast. The Maltese-registered La Richardaise sent a mayday call about 8:30 last night saying its engines weren't working and it was taking on water. It was about 23 nautical miles off the coast of Raglan and drifting closer to shore. Port Taranaki asked the operators of the OMV support vessel Scandi Emerald to assist. It's currently alongside La Richardaise attempting to attach a tow line. A dentist who pulled out the wrong tooth, despite his patient's resistance in the chair, is facing disciplinary measures. The Deputy Health and Disability Commissioner, Vanessa Caldwell, has released a report finding the dentist in breach of the code and referring him for legal review. Amy Williams reports.
The patient, a man in his 40s, wanted his right front tooth extracted because it was sore and wiggly. Instead, the dentist started extracting a molar, which he continued to pull out despite the patient telling him it was the wrong tooth. The dentist then extracted the correct tooth. Dr Caldwell has recommended the Dental Council consider the dentist's competence and has asked the DHB to audit his recent extractions. She says having patients identify which teeth they want removed is a basic step to obtaining informed consent.
A care worker in Hawke's Bay says a 70-cent an hour pay rise is a slap in the face for her and her colleagues. Care and support workers have been out in force today, protesting across the country against a low pay increase proposed by the government. In Hastings, care worker and union member Tamara Badley says she's found out one of the few things you can buy with an extra 70 cents is one onion, which isn't going to feed a family. To sport, and Justin Thomas has won his second PGA Championship title, beating fellow American Will Zalatoris in a 3-hole playoff in Oklahoma. Thomas started the day 7 shots off the lead, making the biggest winning comeback in the last round of a major in 23 years.
It was a bizarre day. I was asked early in the week about what lead is safe, and I said no lead. I mean, this place is so tough, but if you hit the fairways, you can't make birdies, and I stayed so patient, and I just couldn't believe I found myself in a playoff.
Thomas pockets $4.2 million for the win. New Zealand's Ryan Fox finished 54th. New Zealand driver Scott Dixon has claimed pole position for next week's Indianapolis 500. It's the 5th time that Dixon has claimed pole, this time averaging a tick under 377 kilometres an hour for each lap. Dixon's sole win in North America's Great Race came in 2008 when he started at the front. He's having a disappointing IndyCar season so far, so earning pole is a great boost.
This is what this place is about. It's so amazing. Like the ups and downs that you have just in one day is crazy. This is stage one. Obviously, it doesn't mean nothing come next Sunday. So we're starting in the right spot. We haven't had a good record of keeping it in the right spot, but we'll definitely be trying come next Sunday.
Fellow New Zealander Scott McLaughlin will be 26th on the grid. And the second-placed Pulse have their final home game of the regular season when they host the 5th-placed Mainland Tactics tonight in Wellington. The Pulse are 6 points behind competition leaders the Northern Mystics, but have 2 games in hand. That's the news.
The Prime Minister heads to the US.
New Zealand is in a competitive environment at the moment where countries are simultaneously reopening. The United States is our 3rd biggest by arrivals tourism market.
Scott Morrison gets the boot.
I think he was a very unpleasant man who cared about himself and not too much about Australia.
A rare viral infection spreads.
I wouldn't be surprised if New Zealand had a few cases. Generally speaking, you isolate the person who has the virus.
News from around the world. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Waikato. Showers clearing this afternoon and becoming fine. Showers return to the west coast tomorrow morning, then spread elsewhere in the evening. From Waipomo to Manawatu, including the central high country, mostly fine. Areas of cloud and isolated showers tomorrow. For the Bay of Plenty, also from Gisborne to Wairarapa and from Horowhenua to Wellington, mostly fine. A possible shower in Wairua and Gisborne this afternoon. For Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, North and Central Otago and Dunedin, fine with morning frosts. A few showers south of Alexandra from tomorrow afternoon. Bulla and Westland, fine, then clouds increasing later today. Isolated showers tomorrow, mainly about the coast. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, mostly cloudy with a few showers, but fine in Southland and Clutha, north of about Gore until tomorrow afternoon. And for Rekohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd shower. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Another 30 Defence Force personnel are heading to the UK to train Ukrainian soldiers. The NZDF personnel will be stationed in the UK until the end of July and will train Ukrainian military members in operating a specific weapon. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says it's a training-only mission.
Their specific purpose will be to help train Ukrainian soldiers in using a particular type of artillery that New Zealand soldiers are familiar and well versed in. The weapon in question is the L119 light gun, and it's only used by a handful of countries, and New Zealand has been asked specifically to provide the training team for this purpose.
The Prime Minister says at no point will the New Zealanders enter Ukraine itself.
We're very comfortable that we are acting appropriately here, that this is a meaningful contribution that we can make, and also makes use of the training that our personnel have. We'll take every request in that way, looking at our independent foreign policy, but also the parameters of our engagement with our Defence Force, which we're very careful about.
And joining us now is the Chief of Defence Force, Air Marshal Kevin Short. Kia ora, what makes our soldiers expert in this weapon?
Kia ora, Lisa. We actually use that particular light field gun, the L119, and we've used it for quite a few decades. And it's the experience with the gun, and two, the experience we have in the sighting system. The dial sight system has actually recently been taken off our guns, and a more modern GPS gyro-stabilised system is in use now. But we have in stock the sight systems. We have people that are well trained on it, and therefore we have more or less a unique skill that the UK has asked for.
So is it now more accurate? You can punch in coordinates on a GPS for where you want it to land?
In a way, yes. That's what we have fitted to ours, but what we have in surplus stock is the old dial sight system and a couple of other aiming systems that go with it, and we're boxing those up to send them to the UK so they can be fitted to the L119 light field gun that they're getting.
Can you describe this weapon so that people can, get an idea in their head what we're talking about? Does it fire multiple rounds? Is it a single shot? How big is it? How far does it fire? That kind of stuff.
Oh, sure. The gun itself is artillery's, and its calibre is 105 millimetres. That's around 4.1 inches in diameter. The gun itself has a barrel of around 6.5 metres, and they call it a light gun, but it actually weighs some 1,850 kilograms. So it's quite a large weapon system. It can be towed behind most larger military vehicles, and so you can tow it to where you need to operate it. It's able to be carried in under slung helicopters and in larger two-engine aircraft. So in other words, the utility of being able to move this gun is where it gets the light field gun name from.
Are you going to be training them purely in the mechanics, or are you going to be speaking to them about strategy and how best to use this weapon as well?
We will be talking about how to safely operate the gun itself. We'll be talking about target selection and analysis, and we'll be obviously talking about how to aim the system properly. So it will be about how to operate, and we think that if it's a trained crew that is coming from Ukraine, then we think it'll take about a week to say they'll be qualified on that gun.
So who's getting these soldiers from the Ukraine to the UK?
The UK is arranging that.
Okay. So in terms of this weapon, we have war with precision missiles these days. What use is this? What strategic use is this particular weapon that we're helping train people in?
This particular weapon system is used for what they call direct and indirect support to troops, and can be used in offensive or defensive operations. It can be used against armoured vehicles and other artillery posts. And as you would have seen on the news, Russia is using artillery to pound villages and cities, and this will be a counter force against that.
We've also had an intelligence deployment to help with the situation in Ukraine. Where's that at?
They're working with the UK, doing analysis of overhead imagery and using that through the UK system to provide information to Ukraine military about the location and operation of Russian forces.
So are they identifying and have identified targets?
Yes, they have.
And is their work been successful thus far?
Yes, it have. The feedback I've had is we are providing good analysis of imagery, and it is being used by the Ukraine forces.
And are they based anywhere outside of the UK?
No, just in the UK.
Appreciate your time this evening. Thanks for joining us. That is the Chief of Defence Force, Air Marshal Kevin Short. It is 13 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Businesses battling to make up for lost earnings due to COVID are now grappling with a second wave of the virus, sidelining staff. Some are resorting to hiring COVID fill-ins to cover staff absences, while others are just hoping for the nightmare to end. Louise Tanuth reports.
Simone Jones owns Head Start Total Body Beauty Salon in West Auckland and is on the board of New Zealand Hair and Barber. The industry is no stranger to COVID. She says with many staff and clients catching it, rebooking is their biggest task at the moment.
So I've heard a couple of clients that have been sick twice or even 3 times with it. So it's quite a big job to obviously get all those clients rescheduled and obviously rescheduled when. It's sort of like, when is that person going to be back?
Many salons still have teams working in bubbles, bracing for the winter months where it may strike again.
You can't have one person working there by themselves. It's just too difficult. I know some hairdressers and barbers have split to their team so that if one gets sick, hopefully the rest don't get sick, but I don't really think that's working. It's sort of really everyone all hands on deck until something happens and then deal with it then.
For hospitality, it's a similar story, especially when masks come off at the table. Co-owner of Cafe Hanoi, Krishna Bottica, says they're dealing with a huge surge in staff sickness, some of them with COVID round 2.
We use people on call the whole time, but even our on-callers are calling in sick. Sometimes you're just left with no choice but to shut down a service or to at least block off tables for bookings.
They're desperate for more staff to fill in the gaps when COVID strikes again and again.
We're taking people that might only be with us for 2 months. We've asked all of our staff to ask their friends if they want some casual, some full-time, some part-time work for even the small amounts of time. It doesn't matter.
With just over a month at the orange alert level, she says they can't afford to turn away customers.
4 weeks does not cover off the last quarter that we had that was extremely disrupted, let alone the quarter before that.
The orange alert level has also seen many workers return to the office, but with an increase in bus passengers, many routes have been cancelled in recent weeks, with bus drivers sick too. First Union spokesperson Graham McKean says drivers are bearing the brunt of COVID.
It's a public-facing role. Even with masks, there's reasonably close interaction. Bus driver ranks have been decimated with sickness. It's had a huge effect on their availability to work. You do pick it up, and so there is a second wave coming through now.
He says COVID interruptions are compounding an industry already severely short-staffed.
Well, the entire bus industry is at crisis level. They cannot attract and retain staff. COVID is but a small sum of the conversation. The whole industry itself is just falling apart at the seams.
No end in sight just yet.
Homai o whakaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira ānei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. What's going on at your work? Are you experiencing a second wave of COVID? Are you missing people, and how are you getting by? Also, let's know your thoughts on that Defence Force deployment to the UK. 30 personnel going there to teach Ukrainian fighters how to use a particular gun. Text me, pātui mai, 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Horu Whenua District Council is appealing for anyone with spare housing to help out people displaced by Levin's tornado. Of the almost 40 homes hit on Friday morning, 8 homes are red stickered and 20 more still need to be assessed. And after a big weekend cleaning up, other residents are waiting. Our reporter Kirsty Frame and cameraman Samuel Rilstone were in Levin today.
Strathmore Avenue is home to some of the worst hit houses in Levin. Local resident Joe sped over to his brother's home on Friday to make sure his niece and nephew were okay. The house is damaged and they're waiting for a building assessment.
All they can do is just try and get people out, the assessors out as quick as they can, and get people, in safe houses. I worry about this house because, it's had the water through it, and it doesn't take long for the mould to grow, and we're in winter now, so the quicker they can get in and get some stuff sorted is better for everyone.
More than 5 blocks away on Goldsmith Crescent, electricians were still repairing damage to power lines. Jim Larson's home wasn't hit as bad as his next door neighbour, but he and his wife are still in shock.
I knew straight away it was a tornado, but we don't get those here, and there's nowhere to go. You can't run down to the basement, and just for a few seconds there, as the house was shaking, I felt like a sitting duck. I thought, we're going to go.
He says the community has banded together.
The response from the services has been incredible. You know, fire brigade, civil defence, and just everybody rallying. People came from Wellington. Incredible. Great Kiwi spirit.
The council has a backlog of 20 homes still to assess and almost 40 calls for help cleaning up things like trees and fences. Emergency Management Advisor and Councillor Ross Brannigan says there have been welfare checks on residents across town. He says some people were too overwhelmed and hadn't reached out for help. He says it's a relief that no one has been seriously hurt or worse from the tornado.
This is about people. These emergency responses, buildings can be replaced and there's an emotional attachment for the owners, the property owners, or the occupants. But it's about the welfare of the people. That's what it's all about.
Council Chief Executive Monique Davidson says everyone who's had to abandon their homes have places to stay right now. But she stressed some are going to need medium-term accommodation.
We are in a housing crisis where we do have limited options across the district, and so I think certainly, for any of your listeners, a message would be that if people know of homes that we could potentially connect people to, that would be really appreciated.
Monique Davidson says an incredible amount of donations from the community have topped up the Merrill Fund for those who will need financial help. The council and central government had each put $100,000 into the pool. Monique Davidson says the money will go towards helping people if things are uninsurable or if they don't have the resources to fix something. Meanwhile, roofers, electricians and construction workers have got a busy week ahead fixing all the damage. Peter from W&A Sheet Metal was dismantling a busted cricket cage today.
There's a lot to do, really. We've got this one here, and then we made these a couple of years ago, these cricket cages, and one of them's been thrown and mangled, so we're going to make another one of them. And so, it's all on this week.
The council expects to get its backlog of house assessments cleared by the end of tomorrow.
And if you were listening to Kirsty and Samuel's story on radio, we'll put the video version on our webpage. Do check it out. Australia's new Prime Minister is wasting no time getting his teeth into the role, flying out to Japan to meet with Quad leaders there. The Quad is a defence alliance between Australia, the US, Japan and India. Anthony Albanese was today sworn in as the 31st Prime Minister of Australia, while the Liberal Party has been left licking its wounds. Kathy Boland reports.
I, Anthony Norman Albanese, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Prime Minister.
Breaking with tradition, the Australian Governor-General swore in Prime Minister Albanese, despite the election not yet officially being declared and without his Labor Party having achieved an outright majority. Claiming victory on Saturday night, Anthony Albanese promised to lead for all Australians.
My Labor team will work every day to bring Australians together, and I will lead a government worthy of the people of Australia. A government as courageous and hardworking and caring as the Australian people are themselves.
The swearing-in of an interim ministry of just 4 new government members is a stopgap measure to enable the new Prime Minister to represent Australia at the Quad meeting. It's a novel move, but perhaps not surprising for the new Aussie leader.
I said during the campaign that I've been underestimated my whole life.
Also underestimated by the outgoing government was the level of anger among what had been its voter heartland. For the Liberal Party, it was a wipeout of catastrophic proportions. It has lost heartland seats named after party luminaries like Sir Robert Menzies, and that it's held since Federation. Scott Morrison, who ruled the party and orchestrated the election campaign, was upbeat on Saturday despite the losses.
To my colleagues tonight, who have had to deal with very difficult news and have lost their seats tonight, I, as leader, take responsibility for the wins and the losses. That is the burden and that is the responsibility of leadership. And as a result, I will be handing over the leadership at the next party room meeting.
6 of the so-called teal independents, professional, experienced women are heading to Canberra, having successfully ousted a generation of moderate Liberals. One of the biggest scalps, that of former Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, long seen as a future Liberal leader and Prime Minister. As party insiders have observed, these women should have been standing for the Liberal Party. Newly elected Teal MP Zoe Daniel explains.
The Liberal Party lost its centre. People who would normally be small L Liberals or are potential swinging voters like me who sort of drift across the centre had no one to vote for. The Liberal Party had drifted so far to the right that people didn't feel represented.
The ALP is within sight of outright majority leadership, but it could still need to rely on the crossbench. In that instance, Anthony Albanese is a consensus politician who successfully negotiated with independents to help Julia Gillard form a minority government in 2010. As the counting continues, inside the Liberal Party, numbers are being counted for Scott Morrison's successor, with Queenslander Peter Dutton considered the frontrunner. The conundrum for the Liberal Party is that it has been punished for moving too far to the right, which will be compounded if the hardliner former Defence Minister becomes the next leader. The Greens were also big winners in the election, picking up a seat in Brisbane, in the hunt for a couple more, and possibly a few upper house seats as well. Along with the Teal Independents' call for action on climate change, the incoming Labor government will be under pressure to deliver on these issues. Scott Morrison and his family are in the process of moving out of the lodge in Canberra and Kirribilli House in Sydney. Perhaps one key irony of the election result is that Anthony Albanese, the man who grew up with a single mother living in public housing, is now headed for the lodge in Canberra, an entirely different form of public housing.
The new Plymouth Mayor says there's mixed feelings in the community about a social housing development in the CBD, despite a massive need for it. The 45-unit apartment blocks are being developed for Kāinga Ora in partnership with the Soho Group. The site will have 18 dedicated car parks, and the Kāinga Ora says it's looking at developing a playground on shared green space too. Construction's yet to start, but the development is expected to be move-in ready by mid-2023. But already there's some naysayers in the community, and Mayor Neil Holdham joins me now. Kia ora, Neil. I mean, how desperately do you need this development in New Plymouth?
Oh, kia ora, Lisa. Oh, look, very desperately. The last 5 years, we've seen 4 Housing New Zealand or Kāinga Ora properties built in the community, and we've got a waiting list of more than 770 families.
And so where are they right now then?
Well, look, we know that a lot of them are, we've got more than one family living in houses. We don't have the extreme issues that we've seen in some of our larger centres, but people are desperate for properties, and when properties come up for rent, they are just snapped up.
So 45-unit apartment blocks, what kind of difference is this going to make?
Well, look, it will make a difference, and Housing NZ has committed to build at least 128 new properties in Taranaki over the next few years. As well as they're talking about transitional housing, maybe 40 or 50 of those. So there is a desperate need, and we've got this issue where people in New Plymouth and in Taranaki are used to having a bit of consultation. I think some people were caught a little by surprise and have just raised some issues, and look, that's to be expected.
What are their issues? Are they genuine issues, or you got a bit of NIMBYism going on?
Look, I don't think it's NIMBYism. I think the issue around parking is a legitimate one.
Explain that to us in a bit of detail.
So look, you've got 68 bedrooms in this across the different apartments, but 18 vehicles. Now, generally, I think New Zealand's got 4 million cars and 5 million people. So there is a concern that there'd be potentially 40 or 50 cars parked up and down the street. Now, Kāinga Ora, I've spoken to them about this, and they believe the way that they will manage these tenancies that there won't be those issues. So, they can't give an assurance, but they've said to us that they're looking to go out and talk to the community now to understand their concerns and then look to address them.
So what about property prices, Neil? Because some people are talking about potential drops in property prices. Are there residential properties nearby? Are we talking commercial? And do you think that's a real fear?
Look, there are absolutely, it's in a residential area, and there are residential properties next, pretty much next door. Look, I think that it's a concern, particularly if you're really close to it. I think that is a legitimate concern. But
do you think it will devalue the value of those properties? In all honesty,
I don't know the exact answer, but the issue I have is that I think people were surprised they didn't get the consultation they normally receive when something significant happens, and I think they just want an opportunity to be heard. And I think it's legitimate that if you live two doors down, and you read about it in the paper, that you would want to have a conversation with the developers and with the owners to understand what's occurring, because people do think the worst. And, these are good people, and so are the people that are going to be moving in here. And I think that's the issue. And I think potentially people are afraid of something new, and they might have, seen the headlines of the worst case scenario. But we know that there's a number of Housing New Zealand properties in our district, and we don't hear, major problems with the tenants. These are our people as well.
Really appreciate you joining us, Neil. That's Neil Holdham, who's the new Plymouth Mayor there. And just to let you know, if you're in the area, Kāinga Ora is holding a public meeting Tuesday week, and it's actually going to be online. E te iwi e Hariakina e checkpoint. It's touchdown in Queenstown with the first Trans-Tasman flight in 300 days. The Lake Dunstan Trail exceeds all expectations, with tens of thousands of people walking it in the first year. And the Student Army hits the laundromat in the battle against the Bromley stink. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Do get in touch. Text us 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. A
180-metre-long bulk carrier has lost power and is drifting off the North Island's west coast. 22 crew are on board the Maltese-registered ship, which was on its way to Port Taranaki. It's currently 16 nautical miles off the coast between Raglan and New Plymouth. An oil and gas supply vessel will connect a tow line to the vessel, and Maritime New Zealand's incident response team is monitoring the situation. Another 30 New Zealand soldiers will be stationed in the UK until late July to train 230 Ukrainian troops. New Zealand has been specifically asked to instruct them on using the L-119 light artillery gun because it is one of only a few countries that use the weapon. The Defence Minister, Pene Henare, says the New Zealand soldiers will not enter Ukraine. Australia's new Prime Minister admits his country's relationship with China will remain difficult. Anthony Albanese's swearing-in ceremony was brought forward today so that he can fly to Tokyo to attend a summit of world leaders. He says China and not Australia has changed, and Australia will stand up for its values. Mr Albanese is also promising that Australia will engage with the world differently on climate change. A live-in resident whose house was damaged in Friday's tornado says the Kiwi spirit of support has been incredible. Almost 40 homes were hit when the twister struck and 8 are uninhabitable. Jim Larson says he and his wife are still in shock. He says fire and emergency and civil defence have been amazing, and people travelled from as far away as Wellington to help. And the Dental Council is being asked to consider a dentist's competence after a report finding he breached the code when extracting a patient's tooth. A report from the Deputy Health and Disability Commission found the dentist failed to listen to the patient who complained he was pulling out the wrong tooth. The dentist realised his mistake midway through the extraction. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Kia ora rā e ho, nau mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa I nai nei, ko Nona Peltier, who is in the studio. Let's talk about housing. Everybody loves a housing story. Downturn in the property sector, gathering pace, but what's going to not be a full-blown collapse?
No one's expecting that. But some people are going to start to see some pain rather than a gain if they need to sell their property. And that's the key. If you don't need to sell your property, you've lost nothing when there's a housing downturn. However, if you do need to sell your property, you might have to adjust your expectations.
What's being shaved off right now?
Okay, so at the moment we've got a couple of reports. One of them is what they call the pain and gain survey. So instead of 99.3% making a profit 99.1% made a profit. So that's hardly any difference.
0.2 people missed out on a profit.
Pretty much,
okay,
yeah.
Yep.
And the price difference between the profits that people made, the median resale price profit, it dropped a little bit, but we're talking about $20,000 only. And that's over the life of your property. So if you bought a property 10 years ago, the median profit you would have made is $435,000.
Pardon?
Yeah, in 2021, and now it's $406,000.
That's just the profit, that number.
That's just the profit.
Right, okay, so in summary, only 0.2% missed out on making a profit, and the people who made it still made hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands.
Right, okay, that's survey one. Yep.
That's survey one. The other one is one from the quotable value, and they're saying that at the top end of the market, so those are the top most expensive properties.
What do they consider top end? One wonders.
Well, these days
in the millions.
It's got to be more than it's got to be a lot. I don't know exactly. Oh, goodness these. Nothing that I can afford, I can say that. Expensive falling, the most expensive falling an average of 1.2%. That's just slightly. And the least expensive homes falling about 1.7%. But the ones in the middle are maintaining their values. That's a good sign for the market because it means that it's just the top and the bottom where we're seeing some drops. And that's because investors and because people
not great for people on the bottom who maybe have bought their first house and now find themselves in a situation.
Definitely not. But if you're not selling, it doesn't matter. It's only when you sell.
It's a paper. Something
it's
on
a paper loss, yeah.
Okay. All right, shall we move on to tourism holdings? It's seeing a recovery in demand. So these are the guys that have got the, what do you call them?
The camper vans, the RVs, the recreational vehicles. Yeah. So look, they are still expecting to make a loss, not planning, but they have no choice really. However, the loss is going to be a little bit less than they were expecting. So they're expecting to make between $2 and $4 million loss. That's because the market is picking up in North America where the summer is starting. And also they're starting to get some inquiries from Europe ahead of the New Zealand summer. One of the things that's a bit of a downer for them is that there's a great demand in North America. However, they're going to be about 200 units short in the June quarter. So that's June, July, August. June, July, August. And then when September rolls around, those units are expected to be delivered to the North American market. But that's after the peak. So overall, the market's still like that, and they raised their share price by about 2%. So pretty good for tourism holdings.
Okay, stick your running shoes on. We've had the hard words sprint around the markets.
Okay, so the local top 50 index, it rose nearly 0.5% today. That's a good gain. 49 points to 11,316. The New Zealand dollar also had a stronger tone today. 64.5 US cents, 91.1 Australian, and 51.4 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with business. Are you driving right now? Eyes on the road or eyes on your phone? Be honest. Waka Kotahi is trialling safety cameras on 3 Auckland state highways to see how many people use their phone behind the wheel. They'll also be clocking how many people aren't wearing a seatbelt. Waka Kotahi Director of Land Transport, Kane Patena, explains what happens if you get snapped.
Well, fortunately, people don't need to worry about getting issued with infringements or tickets. This is a safety camera trial that we're doing to understand the scale of distracted driving and the use of the camera technology that we've got.
But what's the long-term plan? Will you eventually fine them or will there be some kind of enforcement?
Well, what the purpose of the trial is to understand what the size and scale of distracted drivers, people not wearing their seatbelts through the use of camera technology and through artificial intelligence. So really this is an opportunity for us to test the technology and to understand the size and scale of the problem. It may well inform some changes that need to be made to the legislation which is used to create offences or to carry out enforcement activities. But for the purposes of this trial, it's about understanding the size and scale of the problem.
So to be clear, Kane, if you were to use this or if this technology were being used for enforcement purposes, would it require a law change?
That's absolutely right, yes. So we at the moment, particularly when it comes to using these types of cameras for people not wearing their seatbelts or using their cameras, we can't use the technology for enforcement purposes at this stage. But as I say, that's why the focus here is to test the technology, to understand the size and scale of the problem. And really what we're doing is we're looking at some work that's been done in overseas countries. We know that Australia and the United Kingdom use this technology for road enforcement purposes, and ultimately it's about making sure that if people have an obligation or responsibility to wear their seatbelts, not be distracted, drive to the speed limits, that you've got proper enforcement mechanisms on the road to make sure that we're keeping people safe.
How accurate are these cameras in terms of picking up someone who might be, picking up their phone, looking at the screen, or even texting?
I think the technology is pretty good. As I said, it's been used in Australia and the UK as well. But in order for us to think about the use of this technology, we need to test and validate that ourselves. But for the purposes of the pilot or the trial that we're doing, the artificial intelligence will identify whether someone, for example, might not be wearing their seatbelt. But then we actually have people who will manually check and validate that that's in fact the case. So we do have some checks and balances throughout this trial.
So the technology will signal a potential breach and then it'll be checked by a human?
Correct, yes, that's right.
So with text then, what is it screening for? Hands off the wheel?
So it could be a number of things that the image picks up. It could be hands off the wheel. It could be, for example, actually picking up that someone's actually using a mobile device in their hand. So it's a number of things that the camera device could pick up.
And how big do you think the problem is?
Oh, well, this is the question, and this is precisely why we've chosen...
But you wouldn't go to this trouble, would you, Kane, if you thought it was a little problem?
Well, no, it's significant. What we do know is that over 40,000 infringements were issued by the police last year for people who used their mobiles. And equally, we know that in 2020 there were 24 fatal crashes and 111 serious injury crashes where distraction was identified as a contributing factor. Now, those are instances where people were either caught or where an accident actually occurred that resulted in someone being seriously injured or killed. What this trial will allow us to do is to understand the prevalence of the use of mobile phones or people not wearing their seatbelts, so that we can think about what can we do to try and prevent these things from happening and prevent people from being killed or seriously injured.
So best case scenario, your top priority is to get people to change their behaviour, right?
Yes.
Okay, so where are the cameras?
Well, and let's say this is a trial, so we've got three sites, 2 cameras operating in Auckland, 2 on the state highway and 1 on a local road.
So the snapshots that get taken, will people's faces be visible? What about their licence plates? What's the deal?
We have thought about making sure that we protect people's privacy, and we have engaged with the Privacy Commissioner's Office through this. So we do have images that are encrypted, and a lot of images will be automatically deleted from the camera site, particularly where they don't necessarily disclose that there's been any use of mobile phones or anyone hasn't been wearing their seatbelt. So we do have quite high levels of security wrapped around this to make sure that we maintain and protect people's privacy.
When does it start and how long before you have an idea of the results?
So the trial kicks off tomorrow, Tuesday the 24th of May, and it runs for a 6-month period. Once that 6-month period concludes, then we'll need to go through the process of reviewing and analysing the data, understand the trends, and we will look to publish something which will be made available publicly and on our website several months after that 6-month period is finished.
Kane, in the interest of full disclosure, have you ever used your cell phone while you've been driving?
Well, no, I haven't actually. I've been pretty good at making sure that I keep my cell phone either. It's actually usually locked in a bag in a back seat somewhere, so I don't have the temptation of having my camera close at hand, because it is very tempting to grab that cell phone if you hear it buzzing away or beeping.
And that's Kane Paitena, who is from Waka Kotahi. Let us know your thoughts on that one. Should we have enforcement cameras for texting while you drive? Text us 2101, but not if you're driving. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The Prime Minister will head to the United States tonight for a whirlwind trade mission, but plans to visit the White House still hang in the balance. Jacinda Ardern has stops planned in New York, Washington DC, Boston, San Francisco and Seattle. But her recent bout of COVID-19 has thrown the schedule awry and potentially put a meeting with the US President Joe Biden in jeopardy. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Jacinda Ardern.
The last time the PM was in the US, she invited late-night host Stephen Colbert
to pay a visit to New Zealand.
You haven't been yet, which is a little awkward.
This week she returns and will extend the invite to all, a shameless pitch to American tourists.
We are open for business and, of course, we're open for recreation.
The schedule includes, yes, a repeat appearance on The Late Show, but also meetings with tech heavyweights like Twitter and Microsoft, and a catch-up with the UN Secretary-General. She'll also deliver Harvard's high-profile commencement speech, previously given by the likes of Oprah Winfrey, Mark Zuckerberg and Angela Merkel.
Not at all daunting at all, looking at that list of people.
The busy trip, though, is currently missing a key event, a chief-to-chief chinwag in the Oval Office. Officials had been seeking a sit-down this week with the US President Joe Biden, but Ms Ardern's recent bout of COVID has thrown a spanner in the works. While the details are still unclear, it seems strict White House protocols mean the meeting will have to be pushed into next week, if it happens at all.
There's been a real desire on both sides to make a meeting work. COVID's just thrown us a few curveballs that we're working through.
It would be Ms Ardern's first face-to-face meeting with Joe Biden since his election last year, and the first White House visit for a New Zealand Prime Minister since John Key met Barack Obama in 2014. To miss out would be a major blow. National's Foreign Affairs spokesperson Jerry Brownlee says it is extremely important it goes ahead.
The meeting of leaders like that indicates a mark of respect that one country has for another. New Zealand's been a good partner to the United States in so many aspects of international diplomacy that it would be something we should expect.
The visit comes at a critical time in global politics as the United States seeks to counter China's increasing influence in the Pacific region. Joe Biden will launch a new initiative this evening, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Not a trade deal as such, but a high-level set of shared standards.
At the moment, it's very nondescript, and until there's a little bit more flesh and bones on exactly what the intention of it is, it's hard to judge whether it's a thing that we should be putting massive effort into or simply being a party to.
We're signalling our desire to be at the table during those early conversations, even before getting into negotiations, so that we're able to shape it and support shaping it into something that is meaningful.
Stephen Jacoby from the New Zealand International Business Forum sees opportunity in the arrangement and in the Prime Minister's visit. He says the government must take every chance to push back against what he sees as an irrational American distrust of free trade deals.
It is a political environment that's not conducive to that at the moment. It's just a fact of life. We have to get used to it. So we have to work with whatever we can in the United States while continuing to push a very strong message.
That begins tonight from Auckland Airport as Jacinda Ardern takes part in the virtual launch of the Indo-Pacific Framework. She'll then board a flight set for the US, with hopes her program is firmer by the time she lands.
He's elbowed Scott Morrison out of the top job, but is the new Labour Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, really the big story of Australia's election? Close to a dozen independent candidates have won seats, snatching them mainly from Liberal candidates. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg is one of those given the boot from his inner-city Melbourne seat, missing out to a so-called teal independent who campaigned on environmental issues and political integrity. The ABC's Peter Ryan joins me now from Sydney. Peter, have voters lost the love for the main parties?
Well, good evening. It appears that they have. It's been quite an overwhelming and very unusual afternoon or weekend here in Australia, where normally there's either a very strong vote for the Labor Party or the Liberal National Party coalition. But now these independents really have split the vote. Voters, mainly on the Liberal Party side, who would normally vote Liberal in some of these blue ribbon seats, have pretty much walked and, as you said, have booted out some of those candidates, including the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, which a lot of people saw that coming, but in the end it was quite a shock even to Josh Frydenberg.
So how much sway will these independents actually have, if any?
Well, it's going to come down to whether or not Labor is able to rule in its own right. They need 76 seats to rule as a majority government. Just checking on the Australian Electoral Commission website, they currently have 72. It looks as though they may be getting closer to that. We might even get some confirmation of that this evening. The Liberal National Party have 52, so they've been vanquished, really. that's quite an extraordinary loss to them. But if Labor has to, in the end, if they don't get that majority, they'll have to negotiate with the Greens or some of these new independents, and that could be on whether or not to introduce super profits taxes on big companies that have turnover of more than $100 million, or even a Greens policy which looks to impose bigger taxes on billionaires. That would cause a little bit of consternation, given that it's seen as being business unfriendly, and Labor has been doing a lot of work to reach out to business and vice versa. So that appears to be unlikely, but that's one of the big risks if Labor doesn't get that majority. But at this point, Lisa, is looking as though they may well get 76 and get over the line.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to win a seat if you're an independent. So how did they do it? And so many of them.
In most of these seats, people or voters are very concerned about the lack of action on climate change. And we've had climate wars here for the best part of a decade, where political parties haven't been able to agree on a strategy for net zero. The Liberal Party saw Malcolm Turnbull lose his job over his climate policy. He actually lost it twice, once as the opposition leader and then as the Prime Minister. Even going back to Labor, Kevin Rudd was trying to push in much harder on climate. So we've pretty much lost an entire decade. People are pretty much over it. They voted with their feet. They voted in candidates who have said they're committed to pushing climate change. And the government, or Labor, will certainly have seen the message, and Anthony Albanese certainly made the point that they want to try to make greater inroads and take greater action, real action on climate change.
So the man's barely been sworn in, right, Anthony Albanese? Give us a quick run through about what he's up to, because it's a fast and furious few days.
Well, they brought forward the swearing in this morning. Anthony Albanese and his Foreign Minister Penny Wong and his deputy Richard Marles went to Government House at Yarralumla in Canberra to be sworn in early. Normally they have to wait for the entire cabinet to be sworn in, but Mr Albanese was very keen to get on the Air Force jet and go to Japan for the Quad meeting, which I think you were speaking about there a bit earlier. That had already been booked ahead of time by the outgoing Prime Minister Scott Morrison. So very, very important that Mr Albanese hits the ground running, gets to meet the US President Joe Biden, but very big security issues here in Australia with China and also with what's happening in the South Pacific over the whole Solomons issue. So Mr Albanese very keen to make sure that he kicks some very early goals on the foreign front, and which is why he and Penny Wong, the Foreign Minister, who has been anointed this morning, were on that plane first thing and in the air at the moment.
Appreciate the update, Peter. It's going to be an interesting watch to see what happens over the next few days. That is Peter Ryan from the ABC. Touchdown. Queenstown Airport has officially welcomed its first Trans-Tasman flight in more than 300 days. But today's Qantas flight from Sydney had its hurdles, with thunderstorms delaying takeoff by more than an hour. Businesses say today's flight gives them hope and a lot more certainty. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton joined the welcome wagon at Queenstown Airport.
Stormy conditions and lightning strikes in Sydney delayed the Trans-Tasman flight, but they've been used to waiting at Queenstown Airport. Passengers disembarked to live music, goodie bags and signs, delighted to be in the resort town. How was your flight back?
Oh,
amazing!
Great. It's about time.
Happy to be back.
Fantastic. It's been 3 years since I've been here, so it's really good to be home. So we grew over here for a mate's 50th, so it's nice to be able to come straight in. So yeah, it was a good flight. Just took a while to leave Sydney, so we sat there for about an hour, but it was good.
It's not often travellers are personally welcomed by the Tourism Minister, but Stuart Nash says it's a special occasion.
I mean, look at this. You've got beautiful blue sky, you've got a dusting of snow on the mountains. This is just, it doesn't get any better than this. And for the first time in many, many months, we're going to get international tourists flying into Queenstown. There's a full flight coming in, and I think that's worth celebrating.
For businesses, the direct flights mean more certainty and hopefully more customers. By mid-morning, the Shotover jet was already roaring along the river, despite the frosty start. Ngāi Tahu Tourism General Manager Jolanda Cave says it's great news to have international arrivals on the cards again, particularly for their Queenstown-based business.
It's exciting to say the least. Australia obviously is a significant channel for all of our business units, particularly Shotover in Queenstown. So to see the first flight land in Queenstown today is the sign of some pretty cool things to come. I think it's going to be a slow build back, but definitely a positive one.
Winter is looking a lot brighter.
Difficult to say exactly because we are a bit of a last minute attraction, but what we're definitely seeing is numbers starting to pick up from July onwards. So I would imagine that it will be one of our best winters that we've had in the last couple of years. It won't be anything like it was pre-COVID, but it will certainly be pretty strong.
The last few years have been a mixed bag for Daryl Lovell. He had to close a Queenstown business due to COVID, but his Frankton-based business Love Chicken is doing well. He says today's flight feels like a return to normality.
We're excited. We want people to come. We want to show them a good time. That's why we're in the hospitality business or in the tourism business. That's why we love living in Queenstown. We like showing people a great time. We like showing off not only our town but our country. Yeah, so hopefully lots of people are going to arrive. Lots of people. We're going to have a great ski season. You know, business is going to be busy. Some of us can pay off some debts. A lot of us can pay off some debts.
He's asking visitors to please be patient, as most businesses are still facing staff shortages.
I was looking online last night at what Australia are trying to do to entice overseas workers and young people on working holiday visas. They're offering $20 visas and competitions that you can win your airfare back if you're the first 200 to sign up for a work visa and things like that. And I wish our government here was taking the situation seriously.
Tourism Minister Stuart Nash says there are no current plans to offer incentives, but there is a campaign to attract Australians to hop the ditch and work in Aotearoa.
I know there's not enough Kiwis to do the jobs. We hear that wherever we go, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in. There is a real labour shortage. We're at record low unemployment, which is fantastic from one side, brings other issues from the other side of the coin as well. But it's a really strong value proposition. If you are overseas, you've been locked up, you want to work in one of the world's iconic tourism destinations, you want to have a great time, you want to work hard, it doesn't get any better than this.
While Qantas is leading the charge across the Tasman, Jetstar is only a week behind, and Air New Zealand will be touching down from next month.
The Lake Dunstan Trail has blown away all expectations with more than 80,000 people in its first year. It was hoped the trail would bring some economic relief to central Otago during the pandemic, and it's been a roaring success. Our reporter Timothy Brown and camera operator Nathan McKinnon hit the trail to see what all the fuss is about.
The small central Otago town of Clyde is used to the success of cycle networks, with the rail trail, which has one trailhead in the town, attracting more than 10,000 users annually. But Dunstan house owner Ian Kirisk says the Lake Dunstan Trail has been something else.
It's bringing people in and it's bringing people back with friends, and that's a big thing for us, not just for us, talking to the others in town. It's the whole town is humming. We're lucky that with COVID we haven't had the downturn others have had. Clyde's been busy, and it comes down to cycling, and certainly the Dunstan Trail's been a big part of it.
And with the 55-kilometre trail linking Clyde and Cromwell featuring a suspension bridge, wineries, elevated views of Lake Dunstan and boardwalks literally bolted into the rock face, it's not hard to see why these cyclists say it's unlike anything they've ever seen before.
It's the most beautiful bike ride. Views are just amazing, yeah. It's fantastic.
The bridges and boardwalks and things are amazing what they've done there. So much work, and it's just fabulous.
I'm coming 75 and I think it's absolutely great.
It's awesome, really. There's obviously a lot of hard work gone into making the trail the way it is.
We love the trail. We knew when it started getting made that they'd be really popular, that'd be really good.
The unique nature of the trail and its surrounds has translated into massive numbers. A feasibility study ahead of its development predicted 7,500 annual users, but in the first 12 months it's attracted 11 times that, with 84,500 users. Central Cycle Trail Company Director Brendan Ehrlich says the Lake Dunstan Trail's success has blown away all expectations.
And it's just gone berserk. So we've really just struggled, if anything, we've struggled to keep up. And it hasn't been a good thing to turn people away at times, but we literally haven't been able to keep up. So it's a good problem to have.
He says the trail's success has had spin-offs for Cromwell, Clyde and the wider area.
What we do, we facilitate business for everybody else as well. So, we're putting bums on seats in restaurants, bums on seats in cafes, accommodation providers, etc. So it's really good to be part of, a big team and I guess an ecosystem for tourism that does actually trickle down.
Mr Ehrlich says with forward bookings looking strong, the biggest difficulty he faces is securing the staff, particularly bike mechanics, to keep up with the demand. He says more government support to get workers into the country is needed, especially with the return of large numbers of Australians just around the corner for ski season. And for Cromwell Community Board Chair Anna Harrison, it's the possibility of what the trail might mean for Central Otago's normally quiet winter season that may be the biggest cause for celebration.
I'm hoping that maybe we get a little bit more of that wedge of the tourist market from Australia and elsewhere. Certainly they're here for skiing. It would be nice to think that if they're taking a day off from skiing, they might do some biking.
She says with further cycle network expansion planned for Cromwell, it's well placed to become a hub for responsible tourism. And with the success over the past 12 months, there's already more than 80,000 reasons to celebrate.
Right, some of your feedback now. This is on the trial for cameras spotting people using their phones. This person says, so they take a photo of every car in the hope of catching someone using a phone. Sounds like a bit of a fishing expedition to me. Isn't that breaching my privacy? Apparently not. They have consulted with the Privacy Commissioner. Another listener says there are 2 new cameras on the Old Albany Highway on Auckland's North Shore. I will now drive past with my cell phone in my hand on purpose. Why? And another listener says other countries have enforcement phone cameras. New Zealand has a 6-month trial without enforcement. If they really want to save lives, just introduce them now and issue tickets. Why does New Zealand always have to do its own thing and too late? On the Prime Minister's trip overseas, someone's got in touch to say she went to Japan to meet with the kiwi fruit. Hard to beat that.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A bulk carrier that's lost power and is drifting off the North Island's west coast has 22 crew on board. The Maritime Rescue Coordination Centre was notified last night the Maltese-registered Lavrichides had lost propulsion en route to Port Taranaki. It's currently 16 nautical miles off the coast between Raglan and New Plymouth. An oil and gas supply vessel with towing capability is alongside Lavrichides and arranging to connect a tow line to bring the vessel to Port Taranaki. It's due in midday tomorrow. Maritime New Zealand says its incident response team is actively monitoring the situation. The Chief of Defence Force says its soldiers will be training Ukrainian troops in target selection and analysis and how to use the L119 light artillery field gun safely. A 30-person artillery training team will be deployed to the UK to train 230 Ukrainian soldiers. Air Marshal Kevin Short told Checkpoint the gun can be used against armoured vehicles and other artillery posts and will be counterforce against Russia's artillery.
It can be used against armoured vehicles and other artillery posts. And as you would have seen on the news, Russia is using artillery to pound villages and cities, and this will be a counter force against that.
Air Marshal Kevin Short says the UK is arranging the transport of the Ukrainian soldiers. The Defence Minister, Pene Henare, says at no point will New Zealand soldiers enter Ukraine. The National Party says it's extremely important the Prime Minister secures a sit-down with United States President Joe Biden while she's overseas. Jacinda Ardern departs for the United States tonight, but has not yet locked down a White House visit due to its strict COVID-19 protocols. National's Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Jerry Brownlee, says New Zealand needs to keep pushing for a better trading relationship with the US.
The meeting of leaders like that indicates a mark of respect that one country has for another. New Zealand's been a good partner to the United States in so many aspects of international diplomacy that it would be something we should expect.
Jacinda Ardern has billed the trip as a trade mission to promote New Zealand as a destination for tourism and for trade. The Horowhenua District Council is appealing for anyone with spare housing to help out people displaced by the tornado in Levin. Of the almost 40 homes hit on Friday morning, 8 are now red-stickered and 20 more still need to be assessed. Council Chief Executive Monique Davidson says those who've had to abandon their homes have places to stay right now, but she stressed that some are going to need medium-term accommodation.
We are in a housing crisis where we do have limited options across the district, and so
I think certainly, for any of your listeners, a message would be that if people know of homes that we could potentially connect people to, that would be really appreciated.
The council expects to get its backlog of house assessments cleared by the end of tomorrow. A care worker in Hawke's Bay says a 70 cent an hour pay rise is a slap in the face for her and her colleagues. Care and support workers have been out in force today, protesting throughout the country against a low pay increase proposed by the government. In Hastings, care worker and union member Tamara Badley says she's found out what you can buy with an extra 70 cents.
It gets you a 3B1 notebook, or 2 small onions, or a Chupa Chup, that'll feed the family, or 1 banana, or a couple of carrots, or 2 potatoes. That's really going to feed a family, isn't it?
Health Minister Andrew Little says he's working with officials, unions and employers to secure, in his words, a modest pay rise for these workers. He promises he'll work further with them to get real pay equity. The first international flight in more than 300 days has landed in Queenstown. The Qantas flight from Sydney was due to land at 2:30 but was delayed by more than an hour by thunderstorms. It's been 330 days since the last scheduled international flight touched down. Jetstar will start transtasman flights next week and Air New Zealand will begin next month. And the Student Volunteer Army has begun to offer a free laundry service to Eastern Christchurch residents from today. Many residents near the damaged wastewater plant in Bromley haven't been able to dry their washing outside for months due to the stench. Army Chief Executive Sam Johnson says they wanted to do something to show people care about the horrible situation.
And we're particularly focused on people who actually just going to the laundromat is a really difficult task, and also can be quite cost prohibitive to dry a lot of laundry at the laundromat. So we say it's open for anyone to use.
Volunteers will collect wet washing from residents and take it to Airpark Canterbury, where it will be dried, folded and returned. That's the news.
Kia ora, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Today on The Detail, the big stink in Bromley. They've put up with the putrid stench day in, day out for 6 months, and it's not going away soon.
People just want the council to do something. They want their lives back, and they've just come to the awful realisation that it's 4 more months to go and they've just got to get through it. And I mean, no matter what financial help is dished out, it's just going to be a truly rotten winter for these people.
The Detail on Apple, Spotify, RNZ or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're back on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Waikato, showers clearing this afternoon and becoming fine. Showers return to the west coast tomorrow morning and then spread elsewhere in the evening. From Waitomo to Manawatu, including the Central High Country, mostly fine, areas of cloud and isolated showers tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, also Gisborne to Wairarapa and Horowhenua to Wellington. Mostly fine, a possible shower in Wairoa and Gisborne this afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, North and Central Otago and Dunedin. Fine with morning frosts. A few showers south of Alexandra from tomorrow afternoon. Fine in Bulla and Westland, then clouds increasing later today. Isolated showers tomorrow, mainly about the coast. For Fiordland, Southland and Clutha. Mostly cloudy with a few showers, but fine in Southland and Clutha, north of about Gore, until tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd shower. It's 6 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Canterbury's Student Volunteer Army is going into battle for Bromley residents whose homes and laundry have been invaded by a gut-wrenching stink. The foul smell of crap is rolling in from the local wastewater treatment plant and 2 large filters that were gutted in a fire last year. Work to remove the rotting material will begin next month. In the meantime, there's no point hanging washing out unless you want it infused with a tinge of poo. Cue the Student Army that's stepping in for the sake of sweet-smelling sheets and freshly washed clothes. Sam Johnson joins us now with the details. Kia ora, Sam. What's the plan?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, look, when a crisis happens in Christchurch, there's always plenty of UC students who are keen to help out. So we thought we'd come up with a project.
Lay it on me. What is the project? How is it going to work?
Well, just as you said in your introduction, there's a lot of people who actually just can't hang sheets outside, or actually the extra money to run the dryer 3 or 4 times a week instead of the normal once or whatever is actually quite a barrier. And if you've got young kids or you're a solo parent particularly, who wants to be going to the laundromat all the time? So we thought, well, let's just pick up people's washing. We partner with a laundromat ourselves, and also some volunteers have said to us, we'd happily dry some people's washing at our house and drop it back again. So residents can make a request by a student volunteer army. We have shifts operating in the morning where they drive around and pick up the basket of washing, and then in the afternoon a different volunteer drops it back. And in the middle of the day, or sort of any time, the great team at Air Park Canterbury, they are actually going to dry it for us and sort of roughly fold it and get it ready to put back, and so people don't have to have the stenchy smell in their clothes.
Sounds sweet on so many levels, Sam. So, who you mentioned a company there doing the washing and drying? That's a commercial laundry, is it? Or
yeah, it's a commercial laundry, but actually it's actually a tourism business impacted by COVID. And when we started to do this, Air Park Canterbury rang and said, "Look, we've got this laundromat here that's not being used because we used to use it for campervan linen, and of course the tourism means there's not a lot of use." So they said you'd be welcome to use that, which means we can do drop-offs to them anytime during the day. And then we reached out to the group of students at University of Canterbury, and they said, yeah, we're happy to drop them off. And then we've got a lot of our other grocery volunteers of all age who said, yeah, we're happy to do some loads too, drop them off and help people with some linen.
So, Sam, they're brave enough to go into the stinky Badlands.
Well, if you're just going in for a short time to pick it up, it will give you quite an experience. If you haven't smelt it, it's pretty horrible. And I think to actually just do something small to support those most affected. And I think if you watch the Facebook group like some of us have been doing, you see people who are actually getting quite nauseous and quite unwell from the smell. So we thought we can't do a lot. It's a sort of a big kids thing fixing this big mess. But if our group can do something small to support, and we've got our disaster response funds there, which we save up for times like this, we might as well do something to help.
So they don't have to pay?
No, it's totally free. And but if you'd like to make a donation to support us to do it, we'd of course welcome that.
Yeah, and I imagine, sometimes it's the small things, being able to put on some clothes that actually do smell fresh and to get into a bed with linen that isn't infused with the smell of poo.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. But also the point about drying clothes inside during winter in cold Christchurch. I mean, if you live in Eastern Christchurch and do have extra racks of clothing all throughout the house, your house is going to end up substantially damper than it would have, which has all those health effects, particularly on kids. So we thought, well, as much as this is small and symbolic, actually a load of washing puts up to 2 litres of water into the air in your house, which is pretty unhealthy. So we don't want to exacerbate the problem worse than it is. So this small way to help, we hope, is useful.
Really appreciate your time. Before you go, if people are interested in making a donation, here, go Sam, have a quick plug. Where can they find you?
Thanks. Just Google Student Volunteer Army and click donation and tag it to the Bromley Stench on your way through, and we'd be really grateful. And also, if you want to volunteer for us, you don't have to be a student. You can sign up wherever you are and help out for all different types of responses that we have. Just search SVA on the App Store and the app will come up.
Really appreciate your time. Sam, thanks for joining us. That's Sam Johnson, part of the student army there. And they're going to be doing laundry runs for the people in Bromley so they can have some sweet-smelling clothes and linen. Care workers have been out in force today protesting on streets across the Motu over low pay rates. The government has offered a 3% pay rise, but workers say that's a slap in the face. They say it's insulting after they've worked through a pandemic and now face the rising cost of living. Our reporter Tom Kitchen has more.
Chants were heard across the country today, workers yelling, drivers honking their horns as they demanded better pay. Care and support workers' pay rates, which are set by law, will soon expire. Their unions say the government is offering a 70-cent an hour pay rise. In Hastings, care worker and union member Tamara Baddeley's found out what you can buy with that.
It gets you a 3B1 notebook, or 2 small onions, or a chupa-chup, that'll feed the family, or 1 banana, or a couple of carrots, or 2 potatoes. That's really going to feed a family, isn't it?
She feels undervalued, underappreciated and taken for granted.
The 70 cent an hour pay offer they've given us is a slap in the face for all the hard work and experience and skills that we as support workers and rest home workers and residential disability care workers have.
In New Plymouth, Multiple Sclerosis New Zealand coordinator and former care worker Kelly Davey is devoted to her job.
Physically demanding, emotionally demanding. You're looking after other people's loved ones, and I do that with love and heart and passion because I treat people how I would like my loved ones to be treated.
Sue Carter is an ETU organiser in New Plymouth. She says the government offer isn't enough and laws haven't addressed all the issues.
Because it didn't solve any of the problems. It hasn't solved the staffing ratios. It hasn't solved that some staff are working 16-hour shifts. It hasn't solved the pressure that they have on when there's only 2 staff to 29 residents. They need to be valued for that.
In Auckland, New Zealand nurses organisation Kai Whakahara Kirinuku has also been protesting.
As you can see, we've got a group of healthcare workers, and if you look at the people that are protesting, predominantly older, middle class women. That's not okay that we continue to undermine the health workforce, and that's what this is about today.
She has a direct message for the government.
70 cents, how disgusting. Get back to the table and start to negotiate around equal pay. That's all that they're asking for, is fairness, equity, the same thing that you expect when you are a patient in the wards, in the aged care facilities. Care and respect, and that's what they're asking for.
The call for the government to act is also coming from employers. NZ Health Group is the largest community health service provider, employing around 11,000 people. Its managing director, Josephine Gagan, says it won't be good for her staff.
What's being proposed at the moment from the government is really just not acceptable and is going to put our staff in a really difficult situation. They're going to have to choose as to whether they leave or they do continue working in the sector and making a difference to these vulnerable people.
Health Minister Andrew Little says he's working with officials, unions and employers to secure, in his words, a modest pay rise for these workers. This will be on top of the 2% rise they got at the end of last year. He promises he'll work with them beyond that to get real pay equity.
And it's 6:15, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Black Ferns have got one back over their Aussie rivals ahead of the Commonwealth Games. The New Zealanders won this morning's Trans-Tasman final at the closing round of the Women's World Series in Toulouse. Clay Wilson wraps up the action.
Just as it was in extraordinary fashion in Langford, except it's New Zealand's turn to win it.
You don't keep the Black Ferns Sevens down for long. The Olympic champions added another chapter to their rivalry with Australia this morning, closing out their brief World Series campaign with a come-from-behind win in the final at the World Series finale in Toulouse. A few weeks ago, the Aussies scored with time up on the clock to take the spoils in Canada, so finishing the series on a high was sweet for New Zealand captain Sarah Hiddeny.
Australia are also an amazing team and obviously have won the World Series, but I love this team. We haven't played for a very long time and to now win a tournament, it's pretty exciting.
COVID-19 limited the Black Ferns to just the final 2 rounds of this year's World Series. That means the Toulouse title is their first in more than 2 years, which left coach Corey Sweeney smiling after 4 weeks away from home.
We worked our way through the tournament really well and it's just a cool way to finish it off, and I think the girls did awesome. Really proud of their efforts, and I took every single one of them. There's 13 of them here, played, and they all played a massive role.
The New Zealand men's team's time in the south of France wasn't so successful. A third place finish in their pool, leaving them out of the Cup quarterfinals and having to settle for 9th. But there was plenty of Kiwi celebrating to be shared around on the women's side. Michaela Blyde brought up her 150th series try during the tournament. Cause for reflection for the Black Ferns pocket rocket.
Believe it or not, I still remember my first try back in 2014, and I never actually believed in myself that I'd be able to get to a point like this. So to be able to hit this milestone is something that I'm really proud of.
And something which coach Corey Sweeney says was well and truly on Blyde's radar.
I took her off actually in one of the games when she was on 149, and she reminded me that she had one to go. But she's a special player, and 150 tries on the world stage is phenomenal for anybody.
As always though, team success trumps all for the Black Ferns, and more of that is on the horizon as the squad return home to prepare to go for yet more gold at the looming Commonwealth Games. The New Zealand men will look to bounce back at their second last World Series round in London this weekend, before also defending their Com Games title in Birmingham.
In Russia, it's a crime to call the invasion of Ukraine a war, and anyone who defies Vladimir Putin's government risks going to prison. Dozens of people have already been prosecuted, despite Moscow maintaining it isn't targeting civilians. But Putin is clearly stifling free speech, as the BBC's Sarah Rainsford reports.
Walking through the ruins of Russia's war on its neighbour. Evidence of its cruelty in every crushed street and home, in every story of civilians killed. But Russia itself is silencing those facts, denying what's clear to see on the ground. And it's arresting those who still dare to speak out, even abroad.
The whole world sees what the Putin regime is doing to Ukraine. The cluster bombs on residential areas, the bombings of maternity wards and hospitals and schools, the war crimes. These are war crimes.
For that speech, Vladimir Karamurza is now facing 10 years behind bars. His wife already lives abroad for safety. Vladimir was poisoned twice in Russia and nearly died. But Yevgenia says he refused to be silenced.
He was charged basically for speaking the truth about the war and about the Russian army's atrocities committed in Ukraine.
With this war, Yevgenia tells me, the repression has only intensified.
Truth is actually the regime's main enemy. And this is why I believe this regime is using this law to squash all dissent in Russia and to scare people into silence.
This is the result of an all-out war. But in Russia, it's a crime to call it that, or to criticize what was done here, as Vladimir Putin's army tried to seize Ukraine's capital. In Andreevka, we found a team from the UN collecting evidence of suspected war crimes, stories that most Russians will never hear. The village elder told me 13 civilians were executed here, hands tied and shot in the head. And when I asked who they were, he listed the dead one by one.
Kibukevich Vitaly, Hanyuk Vadim, Ищенко Anton. Защищать нас не надо. Вот видите, как они нас защищают.
We didn't need protecting. Just look how they protected us. They killed so many people. I've got no words for it. They're swine.
All of this destruction, Russia's war on Ukraine, hasn't come from nowhere. Vladimir Putin has spent 2 decades dismantling democracy in his country, crushing his critics, silencing the free media, and now criminalising the truth, eliminating all checks on his power to make this possible.
For Australia's Liberal Party, the soul-searching after its election defeat has begun. Seats long considered to be safe fell many to independent professional women backed by community campaigns. Inaction on climate and female inclusion were some of the issues that turned away the traditional voter base. The ABC's Rachel Mealy reports.
The once safe seat of Wentworth in Sydney's eastern suburbs is now part of a vast inner-city political graveyard for the Liberal Party. The question being asked is why did so many once Liberal supporters desert the party?
One person, Scott Morrison mainly, but also the move to the right. I think that was unfortunate and lack of moderates to stand up. And so he was a bad leader. And the Liberals themselves, it's still frightening that they're so far right.
Oh, they're stupid. They've got a silly head and they only think of corporate business style things. And they haven't treated women well.
Teal independent Allegra Spender has proven to be the perfect candidate to take the seat. Her family has strong background in the Liberal Party. Further north, Kylie Tink won North Sydney, and on the northern beaches, Sophie Scomps pulled off an even more unexpected win in Mackellar. In Melbourne, it was Kooyong and Goldstein. In Perth, Curtin, where Kate Cheney, another Teal candidate with a strong Liberal pedigree, overcame a margin once considered insurmountable. All these seats are very similar. affluent and once Liberal Party strongholds. John Hewson is a former leader of the Liberal Party and the former member for Wentworth. He says the Liberal Party has failed to read the tea leaves in traditional Liberal seats like his over many years.
And those seats have got a very strong, the traditional Liberal seats have always had a very strong supportive group on environment issues, and they just ignored it. And it actually was a feature in all those seats where the independents pulled votes off them.
John Hewson says climate policy figured heavily in the weekend's electoral losses for the party.
They ignored communities and business leaders and a lot of expertise on this issue. And we were clearly identified as a laggard, that we had inadequate responses in terms of targets and policies, and they just didn't want to believe that. And to let the National Party, who've got this fetish about coal mines and coal-fired power, even if we don't need them, to let them run the policy and to drag the party further and further to the right. I've said in the past, I was waiting for them all to fall off the edge of the flat earth that they were operating on.
The Liberal Party's reckoning will need to address a number of issues, including fundamental questions like its partnership with the National Party, as well as its position on the political spectrum.
North Korea is refusing help from Western nations like the US as a seemingly massive wave of COVID-19 cases spreads across the secretive nation. Daily cases, dubbed fevers, have been well over 100,000, and the state says 68 people have died so far. CNN's Will Ripley has more.
The mood was triumphant, the crowd massive, most people not wearing masks. At last month's military parade in Pyongyang, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un promised to protect his people from hostile forces like the U.S. Protection from the virus that would soon ravage his unvaccinated population? Non-existent. Weeks later, a devastating fever, believed to be undiagnosed COVID-19, infecting and killing some of Pyongyang's most privileged citizens.
The military parade was a super spreader event, and we know that they flew in citizens from across North Korea.
Some of those citizens from the Chinese border region, a place I visited 5 years ago. North Koreans are living a literal stone's throw away from the raging Omicron outbreak in China. Beijing pledged to help Pyongyang battle the outbreak. The Hermit Kingdom's hermetically sealed border apparently breached by the highly contagious variant. 2 years of pandemic isolation, 2 years of sacrifice, gone in one parade.
That's the perfect petri dish for this virus to spread. So I think that parade will go down in history as a very bad idea for North Korea.
A colossal miscalculation, and experts say the likely cause of North Korea's explosive outbreak. An unprecedented nationwide lockdown, skyrocketing infections and deaths, a dilapidated healthcare system on the verge of collapse, lacking even the most basic medicines and medical equipment. Millions of malnourished North Koreans at higher risk of severe infection.
I think it's going to test his leadership, certainly, and it's going to create some urgency for very creative storytelling in the North Korean propaganda apparatus.
North Korean propaganda, crucial to keeping the Kim family in power, even during times of crisis, like the deadly famine of the late 1990s, when citizens literally ate tree bark to survive. The Kims rule over a police state that relies on heavy surveillance, restricted movement, and brutal political prison camps.
They strengthened social controls because they had the fear that, if there is an outbreak, if there is a crisis, that was what happened in the 1990s, that, the police, the secret police, the military, they all went hungry.
Now, they're getting sick. State media says around 2 million fever cases in 1 week. A crisis of Kim's own creation, potentially devastating hardship for the North Korean people.
Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall are to appear in a special Jubilee episode of the long-running British soap EastEnders. The royals visited the set of the show in March, and it's now been revealed they were involved in filming for an episode that will air in just over a week. The BBC's Raya Barton has more.
when TV royalty meets real-life royalty. The Duke and Duchess of Cornwall visiting Albert Square back in March. But it wasn't just a social visit. We now know the royal couple will be starring in a special Jubilee episode of EastEnders to celebrate the Queen spending 70 years on the throne. They won't be tangling with the Mitchells or setting up on the market, though. They'll be dropping in on a street party celebration as themselves.
It's one of the best days of my life, honestly, and I mean that I'm such a royalist anyway, personally. So, yeah, it was just wonderful.
We're quite used to filming 2 months ahead. So for us, we are often pretending it's summer when it's not summer.
Yeah, if you get some shots of the trees, you'll see that the leaves are stapled on.
It's not the first time royalty has graced the square. Back in 2001, the Queen paid a visit to the Queen Vic.
I was lucky enough to meet Her Majesty the last time she was here. I accidentally came out of the tunnel and bumped into her as Barbara Windsor was bringing her behind the bar.
And from the square to the cobbles, Prince Charles made his soap debut 22 years ago.
We'll never hear the last of this.
On the live 40th anniversary episode of Coronation Street, he was seen in footage on a fictional news bulletin.
So we'll just give this one a good do it.
Camilla is also familiar with Corrie. Here she is in 2010, channeling her inner landlady, pulling pints in the Rovers.
Cheers.
Oh, you're a natural! Back to the square, though. The Duke and Duchess will be making their starring role on June the 2nd, at the start of the long bank holiday weekend.
Your feedback on the trial using cameras to spot people using mobile phones. Andrew says, yes, find those mobile phone using drivers. My son met a girl in a running race, met up with her later for a training run. A few weeks later, she died in an accident caused by an inattentive driver. That's so incredibly sad. On the New Zealand Defence Force training Ukrainians in the use of a particular gun, Terry says, let's be honest, New Zealand Defence staff are going to the UK to teach Ukrainians how to effectively kill Russians. So New Zealand is at war with Russia. That is about all we have time for now. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. Remember, if you missed anything from the show, you can check out Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō, and tomorrow from 5 a.m, should we be worried about monkeypox? Health Minister Andrew Little speaks to First Up live from the World Health Assembly in Geneva. Have a great evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. A bulk carrier with 22 crew on board will be towed to Port Taranaki after losing power off the North Island's west coast. A weapon New Zealand soldiers will teach Ukrainians to use will help to prevent Russia from bombing villages and cities. Care and support workers say they feel undervalued and underappreciated after being offered an extra 70 cents an hour